It was supposed to be another ordinary taping day. Another hour of laughter blooming under blue and amber light that had witnessed thousands of moments of joy, surprise, and unexpected human connection. Another game of fast answers and friendly noise that would echo through living rooms across America, bringing families together around television screens glowing with shared entertainment. But the room felt different even before the band warmed up their instruments, even before the first audience member settled into their seat, even before the familiar rhythm of preparation began its well-choreographed dance. Something had taken a seat in the crowd and waited with the patience of a story that knows its time will come. The Family Feud studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy. Crew badges flashed silver and blue as people crossed cables with the practiced efficiency of professionals who had orchestrated this same ritual thousands of times before. Stage managers checked marks with quiet fingers, ensuring every detail aligned with the precision that live television demanded. A lighting technician nudged a Fresnel 2 degrees to the left, adjusting the angles so the warm glow would catch faces at exactly the right moment. The iconic logo glowed above the set like a gold moon, casting its familiar light across the polished stage where dreams were made and families competed for more than just money. And Steve Harvey stood just off stage, listening to the heartbeat of the place he had come to know as home. He knew the music of this place better than he knew his own reflection. He understood the subtle vibrations that traveled through the floor when an audience was hungry for jokes, the way the air shifted when a family was ready to win, the almost imperceptible change in energy that signaled when something special was about to unfold. For years, he had cultivated an intuitive understanding of this space, learning to read the room like a musician reads sheet music, sensing the emotional temperature of hundreds of people before he even stepped into the lights. But today, the air felt slower, deeper, weighted with possibility. Like a tide before a storm that would never break, but would instead transform everything it touched with gentle, inevitable force. He stepped into the light wearing his signature style with the confidence of a man who had earned his place on this stage through decades of hard work and authentic connection. Navy suit tailored to perfection, crisp white shirt that caught the studio lights just right, tie the color of good whiskey that spoke to his sophisticated taste without being ostentatious. His pocket square was folded neat as a promise, every detail carefully chosen to project the image of a host who respected both his audience and his craft. The crowd cheered because that is what crowds do when they recognize excellence, when they feel the warmth of someone who has invited them into his world and made them feel welcome. Steve smiled because he meant it. Because after all these years of entertaining people, the joy still felt genuine, still filled him with the same sense of purpose that had driven him from comedy clubs to television studios. "Let's have a good time," he said, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had learned that good times don't just happen. They are created by people who care enough to make them real. The band hit two bright notes that seemed to lift the energy of the entire room. Cameras hummed alive with the subtle mechanical whisper that marked the beginning of something that would soon be shared with millions of viewers across the country. Laughter stretched across the room like a net, connecting strangers in the shared experience of anticipation and joy. And the game took its first breath, inhaling the energy of the crowd and preparing to exhale entertainment, surprises, and moments that would be remembered long after the lights dimmed. Families lined the podiums with the nervous excitement of people who had traveled great distances for this opportunity. Names were pinned to chests like small badges of honor, identifying each participant as someone worthy of being seen, of having their moment under the lights. Hands hovered eagerly over buzzers, ready to translate thoughts into action, hopes into points, dreams into reality. On the risers, faces rose in soft arcs that curved around the stage like an embrace. Phones dimmed as people chose to be present rather than document. Eyes lifted toward the stage with the expectation that comes from trusting someone to entertain you. Lights found them and transformed them from individuals into an audience, a collective energy that would fuel the show. Top 5 answers on the board. Steve called with the practiced cadence of someone who had delivered these words thousands of times, but still found rhythm and music in them. Name something you hold when you're afraid. A father from Nebraska slapped the buzzer with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting his whole life for this moment, and shouted, "A hand," with the confidence of someone who knew he had given the right answer. Ding! Number 2 appeared on the board with a flash of lights and the satisfying sound of success. The room applauded, on instinct, the way audiences do when they witness someone getting something right, when they feel the vicarious thrill of victory. An aunt from Mississippi leaned forward with the determination of someone who had studied for this moment, someone who had practiced with her family around the dinner table. "A cross," she said with the quiet dignity of someone whose faith had carried her through difficult times. Ding! Number 5 lit up the board like a small beacon of hope. The rhythm felt right. The familiar dance of question and answer, buzzer and board, laughter and applause was flowing exactly as it should. Energy moved through the room like electricity through well-designed circuits, connecting host to contestants to audience in the seamless loop that made great television possible. But Steve's eyes kept drifting left, drawn by something he couldn't quite name, some magnetic pull that defied explanation. At podium 3 stood a woman named Mateo Rodriguez. Her smile was careful, the kind that takes effort, the kind that people wear when they are holding something fragile and precious, and are afraid that any sudden movement might cause it to break. Her hands were folded in front of her, as if protecting a small flame from wind, as if she carried something delicate that required constant vigilance to keep safe. Beside the risers, in a position that allowed him to see the stage, but remained slightly apart from the main action, sat her 12-year-old son. His wheelchair shone under the studio lights, like polished brass, reflecting the golden warmth that bathed the entire set. He was 12 and not fragile, despite what others might assume. His presence carried a quiet dignity that spoke of someone who had learned to navigate the world with grace and determination. He wore a red hoodie that brought color to his face, dark jeans that were carefully pressed for this special occasion, and clean white sneakers that looked like they had been saved for important moments. Everything about his appearance suggested a family that had taken care with his presentation, that had wanted him to look his best for this experience. But it was what he held that caught Steve's attention, and held it like a magnet holds iron. He held a folded letter on his lap like a secret, like something precious that could only be shared under the right circumstances. The paper was worn soft from handling, creased from being opened and closed many times, yellowed slightly at the edges in a way that suggested it had been treasured and protected. He watched the stage but not the show. While other audience members focused on the competition, on the families answering questions and competing for points, this boy watched something deeper. He watched the space where decisions are made, where moments of truth unfold, where the ordinary transforms into something meaningful. When the red tally light blinked to signal that cameras were recording live, he did not wave like other children might. He did not grin for the camera or try to get attention. Instead, he touched the crease of the paper with one finger, a gesture so small and so private that it was almost invisible, as if to check that it could still open. As if to check that he still could, too. Steve noticed because Steve always noticed the quiet things. After decades of performing, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense the moments that mattered, the gestures that carried weight, the silence that spoke louder than words. He noticed the almost words that never quite made it to speech, the breath someone holds back when they are deciding whether to trust, the tiny boats that cross a person's eyes when they are remembering something important. "Y'all good over there?" he asked, keeping his tone light and conversational, the way a good host does when they sense something needs attention, but don't want to make it feel like a spotlight. Elena nodded too quickly, with the overemphasis of someone who is trying to convince herself as much as others. "We're good," she said, but her voice trembled slightly, carrying the weight of someone who is carrying more than they are saying. The boy never looked up. The letter stayed closed like a door that is waiting for the right key, like a gift that knows its time has not yet come. The audience gave a little laugh, the kind that asks for a joke to follow, the kind that expects a host to smooth over any awkwardness with humor and move the show along to its next planned moment. Steve did not give it to them. Instead, he set his cue card on the podium with the deliberate movement of someone who is making a choice, someone who is stepping away from the script and into uncharted territory, and he stepped off his mark, crossing the invisible line that separates performers from audience, crossing the boundary that television shows depend on to maintain their structure and flow. Producers hate that step. It means cameras must swing to follow. Focus must shift to accommodate new angles, and the carefully planned map of the show must redraw itself in real time. It disrupts the rhythm that keeps live television running smoothly, forces everyone to adapt and improvise. But the room seemed to lean forward with him, as if the entire audience understood instinctively that something important was happening, something that transcended the usual boundaries of entertainment. He walked to the risers with the measured pace of someone who knows they are entering sacred territory. He crouched so they met at the same height, eliminating the distance that comes from looking down or up, creating a space of equality and respect between host and child. "What you got there, young man?" he asked, and his voice carried none of the performance energy of television. This was the voice of a father, a mentor, someone who understood that some conversations require a different kind of attention. The boy's fingers tightened once around the letter, a gesture that spoke of both protection and preparation. "It's a letter," he said, and the words sat heavy in the air between them, carrying more weight than its simple syllables should be able to bear. "From who?" Steve asked, leaning in slightly, giving the boy his complete attention in a way that made it clear this moment had become the most important thing happening in the room. The mother answered, "Because mothers do. Because mothers step forward when their children need protection or support. Because mothers carry the weight of explanation when words become too difficult." "His father," Elena said, and her voice broke slightly on the second word. "He passed away last year." Even the lights seemed to lower their eyes, as if the entire studio was bowing its head in respect for the gravity of what had just been shared. The usual energy of the show, the brightness, the celebration, the competition, shifted into something softer, more reverent. In the control booth, someone whispered, "Do we cut?" with the uncertainty of a professional who has never encountered this situation, who doesn't know how to handle the moment when entertainment meets genuine grief. Another voice answered, "Not yet," with the wisdom of someone who understands that some moments are more important than format, more valuable than schedule. The tally light glowed red, indicating that cameras were still rolling, that this moment was being captured and would soon be shared with millions of viewers who had tuned in expecting comedy and competition. But we're about to witness something much more profound. Steve glanced toward camera one, making eye contact with the lens, as if it were a person who needed to understand the importance of what was happening. "Hold," he said softly, and the red went dark like a candle being gently extinguished. Television paused, but the audience did not. In that moment, the artificial construct of a game show fell away, and the audience became people again. Real people, witnessing a real moment between a real father figure and a real child who needed to be seen. Steve opened his hand in a gesture of invitation, of trust, of willingness to receive whatever gift this child was prepared to offer. "May I?" he asked the boy. And the question carried the weight of someone who understands that some things can only be shared freely, never taken. Mateo nodded, a movement that seemed to require all the courage his 12-year-old body could gather. He gave the letter like a gift that had to leave home, like something precious that he was entrusting to someone he hoped would understand its value. Steve took it with both hands, receiving it with the reverence of someone handling something sacred. He smoothed one crease with his thumb, a gentle gesture that seemed to acknowledge the care that had gone into preserving this piece of paper, the love that had kept it safe. He read the first line and exhaled, a sound that carried surprise, recognition, and deep emotion. "To be read on a stage, if you ever feel brave enough." Steve blinked hard at the lights, as if trying to clear his vision, or perhaps trying to process the profound weight of what he had just read. He looked back at Mateo with new understanding, seeing not just a child in the audience, but a young man who had carried his father's words to exactly the place they were meant to be heard. "You feel brave enough today?" he asked, and the question was both invitation and recognition, both challenge and support. The boy nodded once, steady as a heartbeat, firm as a foundation, carrying the kind of courage that children sometimes possess in greater measure than adults. Steve unfolded the page with the careful deliberation of someone who knows they are about to read something that will change everyone who hears it. His voice changed without trying, shifting from the performance voice of television into something deeper, more personal, more real. "My son," he read, and the words carried across the studio like a prayer. "If someone is reading this to you, I'm not there anymore." The sentence moved through the room like water under a door, seeping into every corner, touching every heart, reaching every person who heard it with the simple, devastating truth of love that transcends death. Nobody tried to stop it. Nobody tried to redirect it or soften it or make it more comfortable. The room simply received it and held it like cupped hands holding sacred water. "I wanted you to hear me in a place with lights," he read, his voice growing stronger as he found his rhythm, "so you'd know I never stopped watching." Elena pressed a hand to her mouth, her body responding to the sound of her late husband's words spoken in public for the first time, shared with strangers who had suddenly become witnesses to her family's most private grief and love. A woman in row 3 reached for a stranger's wrist, needing human connection to help her process what she was hearing, needing to feel that she was not alone in being moved by these words. Even the bandleader lowered his sticks, setting aside his role as entertainer to become simply a person listening to something profound. "Don't hide your chair," the letter said, and the words carried the weight of a father's wisdom, a parent's desperate desire to protect his child from a world that might not always be kind. "Don't hide your mind. If your hands shake, that's all right. Hands shake when they carry love." Steve's voice thinned and then steadied, like someone learning to carry a new kind of weight, like someone discovering reserves of strength they didn't know they possessed. He looked at the boy instead of the paper, making this moment about connection rather than performance, about seeing rather than reading. "Your dad wrote something beautiful," he said, and the words were both acknowledgement and promise, both recognition of what had been lost and celebration of what remained. Mateo's eyes glistened but did not break, holding tears that spoke of grief processed and love preserved. He nodded once, small and fierce, carrying himself with the dignity of someone who had learned to honor both sorrow and strength. Steve went on, his voice finding its rhythm in the sacred work of carrying someone else's words to their intended destination. "If they laugh at you, go where the love is. If you fall, let people lift you. That doesn't make you weak, son. It makes you human." The room breathed with him now, hundreds of people synchronizing their heartbeats to the rhythm of words that spoke to the universal experience of need, vulnerability, and the courage to accept help. Steve paused, and in that pause he seemed to recognize something profound about where he was and what he was due. He had stood in rooms built for laughs his whole life, rooms designed to generate entertainment and applause, and the kind of energy that makes good television. But this was a room for truth, and he let it be that. He let it make him small enough to fit inside it, humble enough to serve it, strong enough to carry it. He read again, each word chosen with the precision of someone who understood that this moment would be remembered, would matter, would change people. "Go where the laughter is. If someone helps you, let them. It doesn't make you smaller, it makes you whole." The stage lights softened by a shade, as if even the technical elements of the show understood that this moment required a different kind of illumination. Shadows eased along velvet curtains like gentle hands smoothing away harshness. A camera operator wiped an eye with a sleeve, no longer worried about maintaining professional distance. No one kept score. The game that had brought them all here became irrelevant in the face of something more important, more lasting, more real. Then the sentence arrived that would be remembered long after the final buzzer sounded. The one that bends a life and leaves a crease that never quite disappears. I didn't teach you to fish, the letter said, carrying a father's regret and wisdom in equal measure, but I taught you to wave at every boat. A laugh cracked through tears in the balcony. The kind of sound that happens when joy and sorrow become indistinguishable, when the heart tries to hold both celebration and grief at the same time. Steve's eyes shone with tears he didn't try to hide, with emotion he didn't try to manage or control. He nodded once like he had been named, like he had been called to something greater than entertainment, something closer to ministry. He placed the letter back on Mateo's lap with the gentle care of someone returning something precious to its rightful owner. "That's your dad," he said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Still talking, a tear fell from the boy's cheek, landing on the paper and darkening the word love, until it shone like ink that had been blessed, like text that had been made sacred by the addition of grief and gratitude. Steve rested a warm hand on the boy's shoulder, a gesture that connected them across the difference in their ages, their experiences, their roles in this moment. "Lord," he whispered, and his head bowed not in performance, but in genuine prayer. "Make this boy brave in rooms that don't deserve him, and send him people who do." It was not a sermon delivered for effect. It was a breath in the right direction, a simple prayer spoken by someone who understood that some moments require divine intervention, require calling on forces greater than television, greater than entertainment, greater than the ordinary concerns of daily life. The crowd did not clap. They stood very still, like witnesses at a sacred ceremony, like people who had been privileged to see something rare and precious, and wanted to honor it with their complete attention. Then the red tally light returned, slow as dawn breaking over a landscape that had been forever changed by the night that preceded it. Steve rose, smoothed his jacket with movements that seemed to help him transition back into his role as host, and walked to center stage carrying something he hadn't possessed moments before: the weight of having been entrusted with someone else's most precious words. He picked up his cue card and stared at it like an artifact from a different era, like something that belonged to a version of himself that existed before this moment had changed everything. He looked into camera one, making eye contact with millions of viewers who had tuned in for entertainment and found themselves witches to something that transcended the boundaries of genre, format, and expectation. "Sometimes we don't play for points," he said, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had discovered a truth that would reshape how he understood his work, his purpose, his responsibility to the people who trusted him with their time and attention. "We play for people." The audience rose with him, but not in the explosive way audiences usually stand. This was different. Not a roar, but a tide. Hands came together the way people pray, with reverence and intention, and the recognition that they had been part of something holy. No one looked at the scoreboard. Numbers had become irrelevant. Points meant nothing in the face of what they had witnessed. "Top 3 answers on the board," Steve said, when the room could breathe again, when the sacred moment had created enough space for the ordinary world to return. "Name something you hold when you're afraid." He did not look at the lights or the cameras or the board that would reveal the answers. He looked at the boy, giving him the opportunity to participate in this moment that had been created by his courage, his trust, his willingness to share something precious with strangers. Mateo lifted his hand halfway, just enough to be seen, with the careful gesture of someone who had learned that sometimes the smallest movements carry the greatest weight. Steve pointed gently, his gesture both invitation and recognition. "Go ahead, young man." "My letter," Mateo said, and the words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread far beyond their point of impact. Silence clicked into place like a puzzle piece finding its home, like a lock recognizing the right key. Then the board lit up with a single perfect word: letter. Number 1. Someone in the booth had made a choice in that moment. had decided that sometimes reality is more important than pre-recorded answers, that sometimes truth matters more than format. It was the right choice. The crowd burst the way a chest does when it's held too long, when breath finally finds its release, when joy and relief combine into something that sounds like celebration but feels like catharsis. Elena laughed and cried at once, her body processing emotions too complex for simple categorization. Steve's smile broke and mended in the same second, reflecting the way hearts can shatter and heal simultaneously when they encounter something that matters more than their own protection. They finished the round somehow, though the game felt different now, touched by something that had changed the very air they breathed. Bells rang like polite chimes marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. The show went on. Families laughed. Buzzers rang. Scores flashed. But the crew kept a quiet rule on a quiet shelf. If a letter ever appears on podium 3, you stop the clock. You let the room become a room again. You make space for the weight that wants to be carried. Because winning is fun, but seeing is holy.